Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Just the Tip with Dr. Vic. I got it right this time. The last few times I've been saying just a tip for Dr. Vic, and a lot of people are laughing at me for that. But hey, whatever. Just a tip with Dr. Vic. Of course, this is a weekly broadcast that we do for Deja Vu Love Boutique and the other boutiques associated with Deja Vu. I am incredibly honored to have a colleague and, well, quite frankly, I'm a little bit of a fangirl when it comes to Dr. Carol Queen. She is quite the personality in the choice of fields that I went into. And I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an introduction of who exactly we have with us today. So, Carol Queen is an American author, editor, sociologist, and sexologist active in the sex positive feminist movement. Queen is a two-time Grand Marshal of San Francisco LGBT Pride. She has also written on human sexuality in books such as Real Live Nude Girl, Chronicles of Sex Positive Culture. She has written a sex tutorial, Exhibitionism for the Shy, Show Off, Dress Up, and Talk Hot, as well as erotica such as the novel The Leather Daddy and The Femme. Dr. Queen has also produced adult films, events, workshops, and lectures. She was featured as an instructor and star in both installments of Bend Over Boyfriend series about female to male anal sex or pegging. She has also served as editor for compilations and anthologies. She is a sex positive sex educator in the United States and also serves as the staff sexologist for Good Vibrations, a San Francisco toy retailer. Oh, that's a lot. I hope we covered it all, Carol.
It makes me feel tired just hearing all of it, Victoria.
Well, welcome to our weekly broadcast here for our Deja Vu Love Boutiques. I'm so glad you could join me today. So let's dive right in. I think probably what our viewers would be really interested in is how you found yourself in this field, what got you fired up about it, and what it was like getting your education during the time that you were, especially in San Francisco.
Well, I started out being interested in sexuality because I don't know, many of us are very interested in sexuality, and there were some lines in the home when I grew up that made me go, sex, huh? Sex. It turned out my mother had undergone adverse sexual experiences as a young person, never processed, never dealt with, and wound up sort of vibing that out to me, I think. And one of my pieces of my story is I need to figure out what went wrong here and try to live a different life, do something about it, that kind of stuff, right? So once the consent movement roared into action, it was exciting and meaningful for me for that reason. But before that, it was, what's my sexual orientation exactly? I wonder, am I a bi? Am I a lesbian? Are there other options? What's going on here? So from the time I was a teenager, I was trying to learn more about sexuality, to put myself in place. And honestly, in those days, we did that in the gutter, didn't we? We went out and we explored it. And so I had many adventures starting, and by the time I was in college, I was like, this is important stuff to me. Right. I didn't have a place where I could sort of focus on sexuality in college, but I did what I could via sociology. And then I found out there was such a thing as sexology.
Right.
Sexology, that's a thing. That's my thing.
Now, you grew up in San Francisco?
No, I grew up in the sticks in Oregon, and I went to college in Eugene at the University of Oregon.
You went to U of O?
Yes, I did. And
wow.
I grew up in the mountains. We barely had running water. I had to walk uphill both ways through the snow. And
I spent 6 years in Eugene, so I know the culture there.
Oh, it's very much
you know how it is. In the 60s, very much. Yeah.
Well, I put my fingerprints on what I could in that town, and then I split for San Francisco because that's where the sexology was. And at the time, that's also where the HIV/AIDS work was. And by that time, in the 80s, that's the thing that I saw that I could contribute to, that I could do work in the world that was sex related, but also really meaningful. Well, it turns out all of this sex related work is really meaningful because it isn't just LGBT people who don't get good sex ed and don't get good information and have to suffer with shame and figure they are going to have good sex because they're in love with somebody, and whoop, that like they thought it would. So there's always something to do, right?
Yes,
I've been involved in not only did I get my PhD in sexology, I've been involved in the sex industry, and a very informative space for those of us who have ever touched upon that. And met Joni Blank, the founder of Good Vibrations, at a Betty Dodson workshop in the late 80s.
Wow.
And she called me up one day and asked me to come and work for her. And that side of my life, really the rest is history. I've been there since 1990.
Wow.
I'm in the oldest living human. As far as longevity is concerned. And when we formed the Antique Vibrator Museum as a discrete entity, instead of having vibrators on shelves in all of the different stores, I got the honor of being its curator. So, so that's one of the things that I focus on there now.
Right, right. So tell me a little bit about your work at Good Vibrations and how it's changed over, say, the course of your very long career there. I mean, I would imagine that the way in which people view AIDS, you know, sex AIDS has changed. But what was it like when you got your start there?
Well, Joni Blank was still the owner founder. She was very much involved. Joni was an interesting woman. She it turns out when she died, and we learned some more about her from various sides, you know, sometimes you don't really know a person until they're not there to have a conversation with anymore. So everybody ask your questions of your people now, because who knows later. But Joni, it turns out Joni was on, I don't know that she was on the enemies list for Richard Nixon, but he was mad at her for being a reproductive rights activist.
Wow.
In the early 70s.
It goes way up to the top.
You got around, Joni.
Wow.
And so besides, when she moved to San Francisco, she was involved in San Francisco Sex Information, a very important early entity there. And she was part of a group led by Lonnie Barbach, the sex therapist, who is still in practice in Marin, as far as I know, who went into the medical school at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco Med School, and made a training program for pre-orgasmic women. That language was really important because, of course, the old language was they're frigid.
Right.
You know, they can't come. There's something wrong with them. And of course, what's wrong with most we'll say women and people now who can't orgasm is often that they got terrible or no sex education and their partners didn't get much better. And they think they know what to do, fully know what to do to bring up arousal and get to the point of orgasm. You've got to know a little bit about the sexual response cycle. Thanks, Masters and Johnson, for researching that for us. And you've got to know a little bit about what your individual human there likes and responds to. So you got to get better at sexual communication, all that. So they were doing this stuff, and in the process, they recommended vibrator use for the women in the groups. And also the other important thing was that they all talked about their experiences, because so many of us, even today, unless, I don't know, we go on some anonymous forum somewhere, don't have people that we can really unload to about our sexual experiences and attitudes and things like that. Some people have a lot of that. Some people have absolutely none even now. So that was important. Then the vibrators, and what Joni heard over and over was women going, "Oh, I could never go into one of those places." She meant the dirty bookstore, quote unquote. That's a scientific term. And Joni vowed that she would start a place that women could feel comfortable in. Now, not everybody feels comfortable in any kind of a sex shop, and plenty of people feel comfortable in any kind of a sex shop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yeah,
they're frisky, and they don't, you know, they look around and they're like, woohoo, sex toys, porn, woo, and they don't have that ooh, I don't belong here. They don't have that shame response. They don't have whatever. But I think it's important that she got that sense, because what she was able to do with that is go into a space where even people who were quite nervous felt like they could be heard, felt like there was a comfortable enough place.
Now, was
And
it her sense that stores at the time were geared more towards male and male identified people, just in how they were the way they were presenting themselves and how they were organized?
I very much think that was her impression, and I don't know that was always the impression of the people creating the spaces.
Ah, right.
But you know, the feminists in those days tended to think about these places as designed by men for men. And there's an argument to be made that was largely true, but it maybe not as purposeful as they might have anticipated, right?
Yeah, there was maybe their assumption that it was anti-woman instead it was more, it's a commercial space and we're creating it as such.
Exactly. I feel like it was more of an artifact of late stage capitalism than it was of patriarchy, like putting its feelers out and surrounding people. Now, if patriarchy is something that people think about and believe there is such a thing, then patriarchy puts its feelers out around all of us because it has something to do with the way society has long been constructed, at least in the West. But we can go get our PhD in that. That's interesting, but it's not the bottom line of whether or not somebody feels comfortable walking into a space where they can buy a vibrator or a dildo, right?
Right.
Or go in and, I don't know, shoplift a butt plug because they can't ask them. Don't do that.
You'd be surprised how often that happens at the store.
I would not be surprised how often that happens.
Sometimes they're 6 feet tall and they go out the door.
People, I would say, if you didn't have nerve endings in your anus,
right?
Whether or not you think God put them there or where they got there from, if you didn't have the nerve endings, it wouldn't even cross your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
This might be a thing that you would want to do. So you are function of your body. You can go in and say, hey, where's your section for that stuff? Or you can just walk around the perimeter of your store or cruise around on your interwebs and say, oh, that looks like an anal toy. And I want to remind everyone, it has to have a base. That little finger-sized vibrator might seem like such a good idea at the time. It's not. It doesn't have a base. It'll slide right in there like a rocket ship going to the moon. In fact, when you have an orgasm, often your anal sphincter acts like a tractor beam. If we're going to sort of stick with the science fiction analogy, so don't do that. Get the lube to go with it, and there you go. Enjoy, explore.
Right. Wow. Just as a segue for a second, there's been a lot of talk, especially recently in our field, about other kinds of sexual orientation or sexual preferences or types of behavior where folks that are asexual would like recognition. So how, just as a segue, just for a second, how do we address things, say, for instance, what Joni was finding was, pre-orgasmic women. What about those folks who are asexual? Yes, I understand that asexual people can still orgasm, of course. But for those where the orgasm imperative simply isn't a priority, but because of the nature of how we organize, especially heterosexual relationships, it seems like it is when perhaps it might not be. How does, how do you as a sexologist address that today?
Well, I actually think that the growing role of the asexual community is one of the really interesting things about our field now. It helps us wrap our minds around it isn't just about having sex, it's about our relationship to sex, right? And people have varying. That relationship can be fluid over the lifespan, or it can change from one partner to another. I mean, there's a lot going on in there.
Right.
That if we can't get our arms around it, we can't teach adequately. We can't, we can't recommend toys adequately. We can't do sex therapy adequately. All of those things are mixed up.
Right.
So that's the first thing I would want to say. And the other thing is that, I'm pretty associated with the notion of sex positivity, because when I got to the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, I learned that term for the very first time, and it put a lot of things that had been interests of mine since,
Right.
and personal too, since the early mid 1970s into a perspective that was
Right.
and rich. And so many people, I think, in the sex positive world, or even that means people are enthusiastic about sex. They feel positive about it. They like it, which is great. That's great. I want everybody who wants to have sex to be able to feel positive about it. You know, I think that seems like a kind of a no-brainer.
And
Not
it's great that
everyone
you're actually
wants
parsing that down, because, you know, I think over time the sex positivity has been so widely used that people have lost what the actual, you know, the origin of the meaning is of that statement, sex positivity.
Exactly.
Right. So I'm
Or
glad
they never
you
knew.
actually, highlighted that.
Yeah, excuse me. Or they never knew in the first place, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a really robust internet knowledge language right now where people are like, oh, I can look anything up. And it's like, well, you can't look anything up that happened before the year 2000, my friend, because nobody digitized a lot of that information.
Yeah.
Right? So I stand on that boundary and, you know, yell, it happened in the 1980s. You know, it's just, people think I'm an old man yelling in a cloud.
I stand on your box.
But I am a kind of a my responsibility. So as far as the asexuals are concerned, I think that there's been this, oh, they're not sex positive, you know, they don't want to swing from the chandelier and have sex with all the people. And it's like, that doesn't mean they can't be sex positive. For starters, plenty of asexual people are like, yeah, swing from the chandelier. Me, I don't want to do that stuff. And and you know, and boiling it down to the question of desire, I think that's important. This is what can put asexuality into the sexual orientation bucket with gay, etc. Is who do you desire? Of people do you desire? And asexuals would generally say, none of them that I've met so far. No, I don't desire others. That doesn't mean, as you said, that they can't orgasm. They might not want to masturbate. Some people who are asexually identified are kinky and do not see BDSM play as the same thing as sex. So that's a different zone that they enter. It might be erotic to them, or, you know, maybe they would say it wasn't, it was something else. But it's super interesting to help us have this understanding of who's there, because, of course, the other way that we've talked about spectrums for a long time in our field is gay, straight, bi, you know, the Kinsey scale spectrum.
Right.
And as many have pointed out, that doesn't actually cover it.
Right.
It doesn't fully help us understand the question of gender identity, although it gives us some, you know, it gives us an in to talk about that some more.
Sure.
And I think that asexuality helps us understand that there are a lot of spaces we could be coming from.
Yeah.
Let's be interested in sex toys, sexuality, sex and culture, all of that.
Right. And I think that's really important to you know, state in as you know, sex educators and so forth. You know, when people are trying to come into spaces like Good Vibrations and like the Love Boutique and so forth, that it's not just for heterosexual couples. It's not just for gay folks or and bisexuality folks, you know, at least in terms of I don't know that they necessarily struggle as much with, you know, seeking out sexual pleasure. More so, I think they struggle with invisibility, because there's this assumption if you're bi, then, well, you're just still in the closet gay or lesbian, or, oh, you're actually straight and you're just experimenting and so forth. And I've gone into that in other episodes, but I think the important thing to talk about is that sex toy shops are not just for LGB. You know, they're for people who are polyamorous, demisexual, asexual, and so forth. That it's, you know, anybody can seek out sexual expression and the tools or toys that are available for that. I'm curious though, as someone that doesn't work in the field with sex toys at all, what have you found over the course of your career that people were looking for when they were coming into the store? Because I can't imagine it was just entirely functional or biological, if you will. But I imagine you would have much more deeper conversations with people about uses and why they're there. What were some of the things that stood out to you?
One of the things that stands out to me, thinking back to when I was at Good Vibrations in the early 90s, working on the floor with customers all the time,
Right.
and hearing their requests. Now people of all genders were welcome at Good Vibrations, even if we didn't have a full understanding of the kinds of stuff they might want to buy.
Mhm.
Like trans customers, it took us a minute. Male customers, it took us a minute.
Really?
You know, for the longest time, what we had was cock rings. Look, we have a thing for men. We have cock rings. And as I always told everybody, anybody of any gender, of any body configuration,
Right.
can probably figure out a way to play with almost anything in this.
Sure.
You know, just, does it vibrate? Rub it on your body and see what you like about. I mean, you know, there are ways to engage with practically any sex toy, no matter who you are. Although these days, we have sex toys designed for non-binary people and so on, and that's an interesting new step. My worry is that it leads the creativity of, what's that thing? Could I use it? Look, I could. I mean, because that's what we do when we go and open the vegetable crisper and take out a zucchini, isn't it? You know, that's what we do. So we should, I shouldn't use the word should. Right. We could do that with practically anything, and many people.
Sure. Of course. We can eroticize anything. Yeah.
So there's that. But the you know, I am this way. What is he was always a, so therefore it doesn't surprise me very much at all that today we have these NB branded toys, right? Sure. And you know what was so interesting to me then, and has changed quite a bit since, drama, because Joni wanted to make a space that was safe and comfortable for women. Yeah. A lot of feminist identified people and just women in general would show up. Yeah. And sometimes they would find toys they wanted to play with, and they would object to the packaging that had porn stars plastered all over it and stuff like that. Now, I have many porn star pals. It never occurred to me to object to a box with my friend's face on it or someone I had enjoyed in a movie. But there were two things that met in this space, which were very interesting. One of them was, I don't watch any porn. I don't think porn is okay. Porn's not for me. Why is this porn person on this package? And the other thing is the same thing that made some women be kind of upset about, you know, mainstream magazines say, why is she so skinny? Why does she have a boob job? Why don't people look more like me and my friends when I'm going into a space where I want to try to explore myself and get in touch with my own sexuality? Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's an excellent question. Yeah, it begs the question. I mean, it really goes back to what we were talking about before. Is did men make these for men's pleasure? Well, maybe not. But the vision of, oh, here's a sexy woman. Look, put her on a vibrator box. Let's go. Also, did those people get a royalty? I wonder. So there was this whole thing going on, and for a while, Good Vibrations took toys out of boxes and put them in bags and, you know, folded thing that we printed up that said Good Vibrations. And it looked like, you know, the box you get your popcorn in at the circus. We kept it all the way away. We kept it fun, and we kept it all the way out of sexuality, because if you start to image sex, right, the whole discourse about porn we've been arguing about this for so long. Sure. Plenty of porn fans. But it's there. Like, there isn't, it looks like you're telling us to look and be a certain way. Right. Don't do that.
There's a certain
we all want to be sexy. Yeah. We all want to be sexual people. Right. We don't want to be told in the images we consume that we're not sexy. Mm-hmm. And that is, honestly, for plenty of people, huge. Yeah. I once did a video clip show about masturbation, and I tried to get as many and I put them all together, and it was like, this is masturbation in all kinds of ways. And at the very end, a teddy bear gay man came up to me, like a cute, chubby, adorable man, and he was mad. And he was like, all the men in this were svelte, and they're like, they call them wolves these days, maybe, or whatever.
Oh, wow.
They're slim, muscular. They didn't look like the bears.
Oh.
And they were like, you are not representing me. I'm like, I'm super sorry. I didn't represent you, and I didn't find anything that would have allowed me to represent you, and I am so freaking sorry.
Oh, wow.
And when you start to think about the kinds of arguments that show up on Twitter and places these days, representation and all of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this doesn't have anything to do with race. It doesn't even really have anything to do with sexual orientation, any of those sort of big picture things that the whole society hasn't settled on yet. But I think people want to be seen. They don't want to be invisibilized. That whole discussion about bisexuals that you probably had was like, every time somebody shows a picture of a man and a woman together, it invisibilizes us. Every time it's same gender, invisibilizes us. We don't. So how do we? I'm sorry, this is a cat tail, and I'm trying to get it away from.
That's okay. I have a dog in my lap. It's fine.
I feel like this is something that it's taken a couple of decades for people to understand, as far as what their consumer base responds to emotionally. And the difference with Good Vibrations and many of the other places where people might go and look for their toys is we were standing there wanting to talk to them about their experience, wanting to hear about what it was they needed and wanted, what it was that they liked and didn't like. And we all felt like we had a dog in that race, or a cat in that race. People aren't into dogs. So that was a big thing, big thing in those days. Another thing was, I don't want this dildo that looks like a dick.
Right.
If I wanted to have sex with a dick, I'd go find a person that had a dick.
Right.
And I want to be able to explore penetrative sex. And this wasn't just, lesbian feminists or whatever. This was men who were like, oh, this is a dick.
Right.
I have a prostate, but I do have bystanders.
Yeah.
That's homophobic, which maybe it is. But on the other hand, I think most of us in the sexuality space would go, we actually think it would be great if the people who have bodies got to say what happened to them.
Yeah.
And so we needed to have the early silicone dildo makers like Gosnell Duncan from Scorpio, the guy who developed silicone dildos, an immigrant guy who.
You still there? You froze up. Hang on, everybody. Technology, it's magic. Carol, it's okay to log out and then log back in. It'll pick right back up. I'll just leave the broadcast on. Well, I gotta tell you what, guys, I've learned a lot. And this has been a fantastic episode so far. While we are waiting for Carol to come back, like I said, when we opened up this episode, that this is a weekly show called Just a Tip with Dr. Beck. I'm not gonna get it wrong this time. And And if this is something that you really enjoy having guests on, then let me know in the comments, and then I can invite more guests on, because I think it's a really great way to diversify our broadcasts here on Just a Tip with Dr. Vic. I think there she is. All right, log back in.
So sorry.
That's fine. Techno-weave, it happens. You'd be surprised. Like it's okay. I think people are used to it after a year of COVID. So
internet weather, as
I know, right?
So,
but yeah, I haven't stopped the broadcast, so please pick up where you left off.
Great. So what I was talking about was the amazing Gosnell Duncan, who did dildos, and then and we needed the lesbian feminist dills for does that nothing looked much like a member, but some things looked like dolphins or produce bin, or things that people who wanted to differentiate their sexual activity from sexual orientation notions could appreciate. That's what leads us today to non-binary toys, isn't it? It's a very interesting progression. I can make that link, even though I don't think they would have said that they were making non-binary toys. They would have said they were making lesbian feminist toys.
I think it opens the conversation about people are curious. And one of the things, I have some trans folks that work for me, and one of the things that they really struggle with is people ask questions that, isn't necessarily appropriate to ask of a person. And I think with the development of these kinds of sex toys, Buck Angel has a toy and a few other people, it allows people to educate themselves without stepping over boundaries with individuals. They can learn like, oh, okay, so this might be how someone has decided to keep their body intact, or this might be what happens to body when when trans men transition and so forth. So I think it opens up conversation. And what's interesting to me, I got to thinking about this, is the disconnect between those of us in our field and toy makers, because one would hope that they would come back to the people who are working with folks like trans folks and non-binary folks and go, what is it that they want? But I think, like you said, with capitalism, it's just like, oh, it's this, one size fits all. And it actually doesn't.
Well, and the mainstream toy industry goes back a number of decades, and for the first 2 or 3 of those decades, at least, there was a fair amount of, legal opprobrium and nonsense being aimed by the feds. And you can't sell that. And there's still, several states in the U.S. where you're not supposed to be able to buy a sex toy. You can buy a
Ted Cruz makes sure of that regularly.
Gizmo. You can a condom demonstrator unit. You could, but and this is 2021. How ridiculous is this? This is. Let's hope this is all in the rearview mirror in our lifespan, and sooner rather than later, because this wastes our time and energy, and it plays into, we talked about sex positivity earlier, and one of the things that it made me think of when you said the thing about your trans colleagues is that when we get terrible sex education, people wind up not only retaining biased information where on earth they heard it, but also they retain this curiosity about, what else don't we know? As people flock and watch porn and go, oh, it's a sex ed show. It's like, no, this is not Bob Ross on painting.
No.
It's a show that somebody made for your entertainment. You turn on, right? It's not a sex ed, unless it is.
It's not sex ed, right?
There's some of us who have made sex ed explicit. I call it X ed.
Yep.
Fine, but most of it isn't that. But this curiosity shows up when somebody is in front of you and you're like, wow, I could ask this person. This person is not in a zoo with a little elephant that you could turn, and then they'll tell you their story about things about brands in their sexual orientation, but people sexualize them, right? And bi is a sexual orientation. People sexualize them too, and becomes painful and like a form of not being seen and respected.
Right. Yeah, and I think it. But I think that toy makers. At this point, I would have to assume that they would. You guys shall be right back. I would have to assume that at this point, people would, or toy makers would, be aware that these kinds of things need to be addressed. Uh, there are all kinds of different people, all kinds of different body types, all kinds of different um, things that stir desire in people. And I think absolutely that, we're seeing a movement on the part of toy makers to start responding to that. And even in like how pornography is produced, you have feminist pornography, you have ethical pornography. Um, and I'm really glad to see that those things are shifting. So, so while we're waiting for Carol to come back, one of the things that I think, there she is. um, I think it's really good that toy makers are starting to recognize that in the toys that they produce, because there are all kinds of body types. And for sexologists, one of the things that I found when I was in private practice was people just wanted to be accepted. That was sort of the overarching idea. The request, the hunger even, was to be accepted. They wanted to be accepted for who they were, and part of that is how we express ourselves sexually. So it's good to see that toy makers are starting to head in that direction, or have in some ways. It's good. So, well, let's see. Well, you know what? I think when Carol makes it back in, then we'll start talking about the museum, the Vibrator Museum. I'm very curious to hear. As far as I understand, it closed for a little while, but it looks like it might be reopening. So we're going to ask a little bit about the history of the vibrator, at least as it's displayed at the museum. I think that'd be pretty interesting. So, and look, really, you guys, if you have questions, that you want addressed on these broadcasts, just let me know in the comments or what have you, and I can incorporate that into a follow-up show. So, hang on a second. Let me get into my email and see if we're running into some issues here. Should still be able. Let me see. Let me unlock it. Okay, I unlocked it. All right. It's unlocked. All right. So yeah, I see Carol. So hopefully she can grab one of the spots here, and then we'll pick her brain a little bit about the Vibrator Museum and what kind of cool stuff they have there. And one of the things that I always found really interesting, um, and I've tried to talk to some of the folks in some of the stores, like what do people ask for, and I can't speak to the store as much, but what I can, whoops, what I can speak to is, okay, she's trying to get back in, so hang on a second. When people come into the museum, um, either they're like super boisterous and they are laughing at everything, laughing at some of the exhibits that we have, or they're very quiet. And because we're next door to the Love Boutique, um, a lot of people come in and they're just kind of wandering around and going, we say, hey, what do you here to check out the museum today, or did you need the store? Like we go right into the store. um and some people, they just go, oh, I just I'm looking for something to like a toy or something, and we go, oh yeah, it's right over the next door. You just go to the go to the front of that building, and it's right over there, and they've got all kinds of good stuff. And these, I'm talking about even like adults who are in their 40s and 50s, um and she's still trying to get in. And we try to just like, make it normal. Like, hey, you can just head on over. It's not a big deal. You don't have to drop your head. We have this, or at least I do, when I was in private practice, and I try to communicate to people that who you are and how you want to express yourself sexually is okay. And getting to know, one of the things about toys is, and even just, masturbation and solo sex is, getting to know yourself, because when you do have a partner, you can communicate that a lot more easily, and misunderstandings are um, reduced, or minimized, and it can bring you closer. And also, if you understand who you are sexually, then you can make better decisions for yourself as to who it is you want to connect with and who you want to share that intimacy with. So you have people, someone in your life that accepts you and so forth. And I think that's super important. So there you are. All right.
I, I
Technology.
you are
It's
such a
okay.
pro.
This
Right into
this
some
platform makes it
stuff.
this platform makes it so easy. Like it just like shifts back and forth, and we can just come in and out. But I was actually just talking about some of the reactions that people had when they come to the museum, and when they want to ask to go to the toy store. And we try to, a lot of them have their head down, or it's like, oh, I'm just actually looking for toy. And we go, oh, it's right over there, and you can get all kinds of stuff over there. And that actually made me think of a question I wanted to ask you, which is, about the Vibrator Museum. So we talked a little bit before the episode, and you were talking about how it might be reopening. So what all do you have at the Vibrator Museum, and how far back do the items go that you have, and what? Give me some of the most interesting pieces that you have at the Vibrator Museum, and when it's going to reopen, so people know to go.
Well, I hope.
Oh no. Internet's in San Francisco. All right. Well, hopefully we can get her back um, on here in just a second. Oops, that's not the right one. And get to hear about what is up with um, with the Vibrator Museum. And but seriously, if we can get some information on it, um, or you just buy, you can Google it, and I think it would be a cool place to go. I've never actually been to it. Um, but I'd be really interested to see what all is there. So I'm glad to hear that it's going to be reopening, and that it's there and that it exists. So we're gonna give it one more shot, see if we can get Carol back and have her tell us a little bit about the Vibrator Museum, and when it's going to be reopening. I think it'd be really cool to find out when it would be reopening, and what they've got there. So, and but of course, as you know, we are always open at the museum 7 days a week, and at our museum here in Vegas, the Erotic Heritage Museum, and I think pretty close to announcing that we're going to have a new show. Just waiting for some final stuff to be resolved, contract stuff. But we're really excited about the new show that's coming. Looks like we're just about done finalizing everything, and they're going to have a residency until December, and then hopefully they'll renew in the new year. And they're a Broadway show out of New York, and they have a celebrity star as the feature. So fingers crossed. I'll be able to announce that really soon. So I'm pretty excited about it. And working with the producers has been really awesome. They're really upbeat, and they're super jazzed about being in Vegas. And I think it's just going to be a really great addition to the to the lineup at the museum. So, all right, there she is. We see her. Yay! All that density in San Francisco is getting in the way in the of the Wi-Fi. Oh no.
Flames sunbox. So,
So
shall I say the thing about the Vibrator Museum?
yeah, go
Because I
for it.
think
Yeah.
that's when I got cut off. Yeah.
Yep.
So we
Yep.
will be. Of course, we're one small room, and you are a vast, expansive museum. You know, how many people at any given time quotient is different. The one room holds about 100 vibrators going back at least 110 plus years, maybe longer. There's a hand crank vibrator that's our oldest one, we think, but it was made between 1850 something and the teens, so we don't year in that time frame it was made. And then as far when vibrators became available for the consumer, after doctors got them first, and then the consumers got them after right around the turn of the 20th century, and then they began to change every couple of few years. The models altered, as you know, things do now. Our iPhones do, our vibrators do, everything does, and that's when it started, evidently. And so we have not only the old hand crank versions, we don't have any of the super old clockwork ones. I wish we could. We haven't been able to grab a clockwork vibrator. Very old, very, very historic. And which goes to show that even before the advent of electricity, people were figuring out ways to have this sensation, right? It's great for massage. It's good for your clitoris. It's great stuff. Yeah. And then electricity allowed for the growth of vibrators as we know them today. A battery operated one the size of a car battery. We've got a picture of it. It's literally, the vibrator itself isn't very big, but the battery is enormous. And now, people complain today about the very few vibrators left that you plug into the wall, but honestly, that was the way we got our electricity back in the day, right? And so it's a true innovation that we have all these rechargeables. Battery vibrators were the missing link between the two, and battery vibes are still very important, especially.
I didn't know there was a crank vibrator. I had no idea there was a crank vibrator. Oh. Yeah, and as far as I know, while she's coming back in, we'll have her come back in one more time. Vibrators were used by doctors to treat quote unquote hysteria in women in, I think, the late 1800s and throughout the 1900s, at least early 1900s. And I mean, just as a funny question, hysteria based on what? Not having an orgasm all the time? But they were onto something, because having an orgasm definitely releases endorphins and creates a sense of calm for folks. And so uh, uh, it worked. And now we get to take those fun items home with us. So that is cool. I think you guys should go see the Vibrator Museum. I had no idea there was a crank vibrator. That's just amazing. I'm gonna be chuckling about that. I'm trying to figure out how does that work? Aren't you distracted by moving the crank to actually? But hey, we do what we can. So go check out the Vibrator Museum in San Francisco. It sounds like an amazing place. So we're going to wait for Carol to come in, and then we're going to thank her so much. We're getting about to the end of our time here. And, as always, please do, whoever you are, and whatever your, desires are, and whatever your preferences are, please pay a visit to one of the Deja Vu retailers, or if you're in San Francisco, Good Vibrations, or any of the, it's okay to pay a visit to these places and explore what appeals to you and what you would enjoy. So regardless of how that manifests itself, you are You are just okay, just the way you are. So, well, hopefully we'll get her back, and we can say our goodbyes today. And then I don't actually have a plan for next week's episode. I'm hoping to we just installed actually this really cool new sculpture. It's a pretty big sculpture. And it's a sculpture that says a lot in a very simple way. There's a lot to it. So I might talk about that, and what its inspiration was. and and then I'm not sure if we covered all of the astral bodies in the Sex and Space exhibit yet. I think there might be um, one left, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to go back over the episodes and figure it out. But um, so I'm just waiting for Carol to get back here. If she's able to log back in, her internet seems to be kind of spotty there. Um, and then yeah, like if you guys have ideas or suggestions and you want to have me do an episode on one of those, let me know, and I'll go ahead and make sure that that gets addressed, or that we feature that on a future episode. So I'm not sure she's gonna make it back this time. Her internet was getting pretty bad. So uh, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wrap up, and I'm gonna send her a note and thank her so much for joining us today. I hope you guys got a lot out of this episode. I actually learned a lot today, and with that, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for joining me and Dr. Crow Queen for this episode of Just a Tip with Dr. Vic. And I will see you all next week. All right. Take care. See you later. Bye.